The wedding ring slipped from Margaret Callahan's frozen fingers onto the pawnshop counter, the last piece of her dead husband she'd sworn never to surrender. Behind her, 6 hungry children waited in the snow, and the banker's deadline was 3 days away. 20 cents, the shopkeeper said. That's all it's worth. But what Margaret didn't know was that a cowboy named Samuel Thornton had just walked through the door, and he was about to change 7 lives forever. This is their story. Stay with me until the end, and comment below what city you're watching from, so I can see how far this story travels. The bell above Hartley's pawn shop rang like a death knell as Margaret Ruth Callahan pushed through the door, her fingers so numb she could barely feel the gold band she clutched in her palm. 8 months. 8 months since Daniel had kissed her goodbye and walked into the Morrison mine. 8 months since they'd carried what was left of him home in a pine box. 8 months of watching everything they'd built together crumble to dust while her children grew thinner and her hope grew smaller. And now this, the final surrender. "Help you, ma'am?" Old Silas Hartley peered at her from behind his counter, his spectacles catching the weak winter light. Margaret had known this man for 3 years. He'd sold Daniel the pocket watch he'd carried to his death. He'd always been pleasant enough when they'd had money to spend. Now his eyes held nothing but the cold calculation of commerce. "I need to sell this." Margaret placed the ring on the counter. Her voice didn't shake. She wouldn't let it shake. "It's gold. Real gold. My husband bought it in Boston before we came west." Hartley picked up the ring, turned it over in his fingers, held it up to examine the inscription inside. DC to MR, forever. Forever had lasted 7 years. 20 cents, Hartley said. Margaret's heart stopped. "What?" 20 cents. "That's my offer. That ring cost $15. It's pure gold. You can see..." "I can see it's scratched and worn. I can see gold prices are down. I can see I got a dozen wedding rings in that case already that nobody's buying." Hartley set the ring down between them. 20 cents, Mrs. Callahan. Take it or leave it." 20 cents. 20 cents for the ring Daniel had saved 6 months to buy. 20 cents for the symbol of everything they'd promised each other. 20 cents wouldn't buy enough flour to last a week, wouldn't pay a fraction of the taxes she owed, wouldn't do a blessed thing to keep her children from starving. "Please." The word tore out of her before she could stop it. "Mr. Hartley, please. I have 6 children at home. The youngest is 3 years old. We haven't had a real meal in..." "That ain't my concern, ma'am." Hartley's voice was flat final. 20 cents is my offer. You want charity, try the church." Margaret's hands curled into fists at her sides. She wanted to scream at him, wanted to grab that ring back and throw it in his face, wanted to tell him exactly what she thought of a man who'd take advantage of a widow's desperation. But she couldn't afford pride. Pride didn't fill empty bellies. Pride didn't keep children warm. "I'll take it," she whispered. The bell rang again. Margaret didn't turn around, didn't care who else had come in to witness her humiliation. She kept her eyes fixed on Hartley as he counted out 20 cents in copper coins, each one a small death, each one a piece of her dignity sold for nothing. "Mrs. Callahan." The voice came from behind her, deep, quiet, carrying an authority that made even Hartley look up from his counting. Margaret turned. The man standing just inside the door was taller than Daniel had been, with shoulders broad enough to fill the doorframe. His clothes were worn, but clean, the clothes of a working man who took care of what he had. Snow dusted his dark hair and his eyes, gray as storm clouds, gray as the winter sky outside, were fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Do I know you?" Margaret asked, her voice sharper than she intended. She didn't need witnesses, didn't need some stranger's pity. "No, ma'am. Name's Samuel Thornton. I've got a ranch about 15 miles north." He paused, those gray eyes dropping to the ring on the counter, to the coins Hartley was pushing toward her. "Couldn't help but overhear your situation." My situation is none of your business, Mr. Thornton. Reckon it ain't. He stepped forward, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. But I find myself making it my business anyway. Hartley straightened up, suddenly wary. Now, Sam, this is a private transaction. 20 cents Silas. Thornton's voice was soft, but there was something dangerous underneath it. For a gold wedding ring from a widow with 6 children. It's what the market. The market. Thornton reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a leather billfold. Margaret watched frozen as he counted out bills onto the counter. Here's $15. That's what the ring's worth, and we both know it. Hartley's face flushed red. I don't need you telling me how to run my business. And I don't need to keep doing business with a man who cheats widows. Thornton's eyes never left Hartley's face. Take the money. Give the lady her ring back. The silence stretched tight as piano wire. Margaret couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't understand what was happening or why this stranger was doing this. Fine. Hartley snatched up the bills, his movements jerky with anger. Take it. Take the ring. And don't either of you come back in my store. Margaret felt the ring pressed back into her palm. Felt its weight, its warmth from Hartley's handling. She closed her fingers around it and looked up at Samuel Thornton. I can't accept this, she said. I don't even know you. I can't. Keep your ring, ma'am. His voice was gentler now, but no less firm. You shouldn't have to sell your memories to survive. But we can talk outside. Thornton touched the brim of his hat and held the door open. After you, Mrs. Callahan. Margaret walked out into the cold on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. The winter air hit her face like a slap, sharp and biting, but she barely felt it. Her mind was spinning, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Mama! The voice came from the wagon parked across the street. Sarah's voice, her 12-year-old, her responsible one who'd stayed with the younger children while Margaret went into the pawn shop. Mama, is everything okay? Margaret looked at her children, all 6 of them huddled together in the wagon bed under every blanket they owned. Will, 14, and trying so hard to be the man of the family, his jaw set against the cold. Sarah always watching, always worrying. Tom, 10 years old, and still somehow believing everything would be all right. Grace, 7, with her serious eyes that saw too much. Jamie, 5, pressed against his sisters for warmth. And Emma, her baby only 3, her face pale and pinched with the cold that never seemed to leave her anymore. 6 children. 6 reasons to keep fighting. 6 reasons she'd walked into that pawn shop, ready to sell her soul, if that's what it took. Everything's fine, sweetheart, Margaret called back, her voice steadier than she felt. Just give me a minute. She turned to face Thornton, who had followed her out and now stood a respectful distance away, his hands in his coat pockets, his expression unreadable. Why? She demanded. Why would you do that? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. No, ma'am, I don't. Then why? Thornton was quiet for a long moment. His eyes drifted to the wagon, to the children watching them with varying degrees of curiosity and suspicion. When he spoke again, his voice was rough around the edges. My mother was a widow, raised 4 boys on her own after my father died in a mining accident. Company didn't give her a penny, not 1 cent for his life. He paused, and Margaret saw something flicker in those gray eyes. Old pain, old anger carefully controlled. I watched her work herself to death trying to keep us fed. Watched her starve herself so we could eat. She died when I was 15, pneumonia. Too weak to fight it off. Margaret's throat tightened. I'm sorry. Don't be. It was a long time ago. Thornton looked at her directly. Point is, I know what it looks like when a woman's at the end of her rope, when she's willing to give up the last thing that matters just to keep her children alive one more day. And I swore to myself, if I ever had the chance to help someone like my mother, I wouldn't walk away. So this is charity. Margaret heard the bitterness in her own voice. You're salving your conscience by helping the poor, desperate widow. No, ma'am, this ain't charity. Thornton's jaw tightened. This is a job offer. Margaret stared at him. A job offer. My ranch is the biggest operation in this territory. 700 head of cattle, 24 horses, bunkhouse full of hands, and not a single one of them can cook worth a damn. The corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. I need someone to manage the house, prepare meals, keep things running. Pay is 75 cents a day plus room and board for you and all your children. Margaret's mind raced, trying to find the catch, the hidden cost, the strings that surely had to be attached. Room and board, she repeated slowly. For all of us, all 7 of us. That's what I said. And you expect me to believe you're offering this out of the goodness of your heart? A stranger you just met. I expect you to believe I need a cook. Thornton's voice was patient, as if he'd anticipated every one of her objections. I expect you to believe your children need food and shelter, and winter's only going to get worse. And I expect you to believe that sometimes, Mrs. Callahan, good things happen to people who've had more than their share of bad. Margaret wanted to argue, wanted to throw his offer back in his face and tell him she didn't need his help, didn't need anyone's help. But she looked at her children again, at Will's hollow cheeks, and Sarah's worried eyes, and Emma's tiny body shivering under the blankets, and felt all her pride crumble to dust. The taxes, she said quietly. On our land. I owe $60 by Friday or the bank takes everything. Even if I take your job, I can't. How much do you owe total, Mal? $63.40. Thornton reached into his billfold again. Margaret watched as he counted out bills, more money than she'd seen in months, and held them out to her. Consider it an advance on your wages. That's not... Margaret's voice cracked. That's 6 months' wages. I can't take 6 months' wages before I've worked a single day. You can, and you will. Thornton pressed the money into her hands, folding her fingers around it. His hands were warm, despite the cold, rough with calluses, gentle in their insistence. Pay off your taxes, keep your land, and when you're ready, bring your children to my ranch. There's room for all of you. Margaret looked down at the money in her hands, looked at the ring still clutched in her other palm, looked at this stranger who had walked into the worst moment of her life and somehow made it bearable. Why? She asked again, but the word came out different this time, softer, more wondering than accusatory. Because nobody helped my mother. Thornton stepped back, putting distance between them. And I've spent 30 years wishing somebody had. This is me being somebody, Mrs. Callahan. For you, for your children. That's all there is to it. He touched his hat again. I'll be in town until tomorrow afternoon. When you've paid your taxes and you're ready to talk details, I'll be at the hotel. Room 12. Then he turned and walked away, leaving Margaret standing in the snow with a fortune in her hands and tears freezing on her cheeks. Mama! Who was that man? Sarah had climbed down from the wagon and was approaching cautiously, her eyes moving between Margaret and Thornton's retreating figure. I don't know, baby. Margaret looked at the money again, still not quite believing it was real. I don't know who he is. What did he give you? Is that money, Mama? That's a lot of money. I know. Where did it come from? Why would he? Sarah. Margaret took a deep breath and forced herself to focus. There would be time for questions later. Right now she had something more important to do. Stay here with your brothers and sisters. I need to go to the bank. The bank? Sarah's eyes widened. Mama, are you going to? I'm going to pay off our taxes. The words felt strange in Margaret's mouth, like speaking a foreign language. I'm going to save our farm. But how? I thought we didn't have... We didn't. But now we do. Margaret squeezed her daughter's shoulder. Watch the little ones. I'll be back soon. The walk to the First Wyoming Bank felt like a dream. Margaret's feet moved automatically, carrying her down the snow-packed street, while her mind tried to process what had happened. The money was real. She could feel its weight in her pocket, could count it again and again, and come up with the same impossible number. But the reality of it hadn't sunk in. Might never sink in. The bank was warm when she entered, heated by a cast-iron stove that made the air thick and close. A few customers sat in chairs along the wall waiting their turn. Behind the counter, a teller was counting coins with mechanical precision. And in the glass-walled office at the back, Cornelius Wells sat at his desk like a spider in its web. Margaret had never liked Wells. He was too smooth, too polished, his smile too ready, and his eyes too cold. He'd taken over the bank 2 years ago and had spent every moment since finding ways to squeeze money out of the struggling families in the territory. Daniel had called him a vulture once, and Margaret had never forgotten the aptness of that description. Now she watched as Wells looked up from his papers and saw her. His smile spread across his face like oil on water. "Mrs. Callahan." He rose and came to his office door, gesturing her inside with an expansive wave. "What a pleasant surprise. Please come in, come in." Margaret entered the office, keeping her spine straight and her chin up. She would not let this man see her fear, would not give him the satisfaction. "I'm here to pay my taxes," she said, her voice steady. "All of them, in full." Wells's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. "I'm sorry, I must have misheard you. You said—" "I said I'm here to pay my taxes. $63.40. Margaret reached into her pocket and pulled out the bills Thornton had given her. "I'd like a receipt, please." The silence that followed was deeply satisfying. Wells stared at the money in her hands, his composure cracking just enough to show the ugly surprise underneath. "Where did you get that?" His voice had lost its oily smoothness. "Mrs. Callahan, if you've stolen—" "I haven't stolen anything." Margaret laid the bills on his desk, counting them out one by one. "This is honest money, Mr. Wells. I've been offered a job. The wages were advanced to me." "A job? What kind of job?" Wells's eyes narrowed. "Who would hire—" "That's none of your business." Margaret finished counting and pushed the stack toward him. $63.40. That pays off everything I owe. Now give me my receipt and the deed to my land." Wells didn't move. His jaw worked, and Margaret could see the calculations running behind his eyes. He'd been so close to taking her land, her home, the last thing she had to leave her children. And now it was slipping through his fingers. "You know," he said slowly, leaning back in his chair, "paying off your taxes doesn't solve your problems, Mrs. Callahan. You're still a woman alone with 6 children. You still have a farm, you can't work by yourself. Come spring, you'll be right back here begging for extensions, falling behind again." "Maybe I will, maybe I won't." Margaret kept her voice calm, though her heart was pounding. "Either way, it's not your concern anymore. Now give me my receipt." "There's another option." Wells's smile had returned, but it was different now, hungrier. "I've been thinking about your situation, and it occurs to me that a woman in your position needs more than a job. She needs protection, security, a husband." Margaret's stomach turned. "Excuse me." "I'm a wealthy man, Mrs. Callahan. Comfortable. Established." Wells spread his hands as if presenting himself as a gift. "I could take care of you and your children. Make sure they want for nothing. All you'd have to do is say yes." The proposal hit Margaret like a physical blow. For a moment she couldn't speak, couldn't think, could only stare at this man who thought she would trade herself for security, who thought her desperation made her available for purchase. "Mr. Wells." Her voice came out cold and sharp. "I would rather starve in the snow than spend one day as your wife. Now give me my receipt before I make a scene that'll have the whole town talking." Wells's face flushed red, then white with fury. For a long moment, Margaret thought he might refuse, might find some way to deny her what was rightfully hers. But there were witnesses in the bank, people watching through the glass walls of his office, people who would talk. Fine. He snatched paper and pen, scrawled out a receipt with jerky, angry movements. "Here's your receipt. And here." He yanked open a drawer and pulled out a folded document, "is your deed. You're paid up through next January." Margaret took both papers, checked them carefully, and tucked them into her pocket with the remaining money. "Thank you, Mr. Wells." She turned to leave, then paused at the door. "And just so we're clear, if you ever speak to me that way again, I'll make sure every woman in this territory knows exactly what kind of man you are." She didn't wait for his response. She walked out of the bank with her head held high, her farm secured, and her dignity intact. The cold air outside felt like freedom. The children were waiting exactly where she'd left them, 6 worried faces watching as she approached the wagon. Will had climbed down and was standing by the horses, his hands shoved in his pockets, trying to look like a man instead of the frightened boy he really was. "Mama," Sarah's voice was small. "What happened? Did you—" "We're safe." Margaret climbed up into the wagon seat, her hands still trembling. "The taxes are paid. The farm is ours." "Paid?" Will's voice cracked. "How? We didn't have—" "A man helped us." Margaret gathered the reins, not quite ready to explain everything. "A rancher named Samuel Thornton. He offered me a job, and he advanced me the wages." "What kind of job?" Will's jaw tightened with suspicion. "Mama, you can't just take money from strangers. What does he want in return?" "He wants a cook, Will. Someone to prepare meals for his ranch hands." Margaret looked at her son, seeing Daniel in the set of his shoulders and the protective anger in his eyes. "That's all, just cooking." "And you believe him?" "I don't know what I believe." Margaret was too tired to lie, too overwhelmed to pretend. "But I know we were starving. I know the bank was going to take our land. And I know this man gave us a chance when nobody else would. So yes, I'm going to take it. We're going to take it." Will's mouth opened to argue, but Sarah put her hand on his arm. "Will, we haven't had real food in weeks. Jamie and Emma are sick from the cold. Whatever Mama decides, it has to be better than this." The fight went out of Will's shoulders. He was 14 years old, trying to carry a weight no child should have to carry, and Margaret's heart ached for him. "It's going to be all right," she said softly. "I promise you will. I won't let anything happen to this family." "That's what Pa said." Will's voice was barely a whisper. "Before he went into the mine." The words hit Margaret like a knife. She had no answer for them, no comfort to offer. Daniel had promised them everything would be all right, and then he'd died and nothing had been all right since. "I know," she said finally, "but I'm still here, and I'm not going anywhere." She flicked the reins and the wagon lurched forward through the snow. Behind her, 6 children huddled together for warmth, each one carrying their own fear, their own hope, their own desperate need for something to believe in. And somewhere ahead, at a ranch 15 miles north, a stranger waited to see if she would take the chance he was offering. Margaret didn't know if she was walking into salvation or disaster. Didn't know if Samuel Thornton was the answer to her prayers, or just another problem waiting to unfold. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She had 6 children who were counting on her. 6 reasons to keep fighting, keep hoping, keep putting one foot in front of the other, no matter how tired she was or how scared. And for them, for Will and Sarah and Tom and Grace and Jamie and Emma, she would walk through fire if she had to. The snow was falling harder now, and the road home seemed to stretch forever. But for the first time in 8 months, Margaret Callahan felt something she'd almost forgotten how to feel. Hope. Small and fragile, and probably foolish, but there. Against all odds, against every cruel lesson this world had taught her hope. She held on to it with both hands, as the wagon carried her family home through the storm. The journey to Samuel Thornton's ranch took most of the next day. Margaret had spent the night at their farm, packing what little they could carry, saying goodbye to the house Daniel had built with his own hands. She'd walked through each room one last time, touching the walls he'd raised the doorframe, where she'd carved the children's heights, the spot by the fireplace, where he'd held her on cold winter nights. "We'll come back," she'd whispered to the empty rooms. "Someday. I promise." But promises felt hollow these days. She'd made so many of them, and life had broken every one. Now the wagon creaked along a snow-covered road, and Margaret watched the landscape change from familiar to foreign. The children were quiet behind her, even Tom, who usually couldn't stop talking. They understood in the way children always understand that something important was happening. Something that couldn't be undone. "Mama." Grace's small voice broke the silence. "Are we going to live with strangers?" "For a while, sweetheart, until we get back on our feet." "Will the strangers be nice?" Margaret thought of Samuel Thornton's gray eyes, of the roughness in his voice when he'd spoken about his mother. "I think so, baby. I hope so." "What if they're not?" This from Will, his voice sharp with the anger he'd been carrying since his father died. "What if this is all a trick? What if he wants something you're not telling us about?" "Will." Margaret kept her voice steady, though his words cut deep. "I know you're scared. I'm scared too, but I need you to trust me." "Trust you?" Will's laugh was bitter, too old for 14. "Pa trusted that mine. Said it was safe. Said he'd be home for supper." The wagon fell silent. Margaret felt the weight of her son's grief pressing against her own two broken hearts, with no way to comfort each other. "Your father did what he thought was right," she said quietly. "And so am I. That's all any of us can do." Will didn't answer. He turned away and stared at the passing landscape, his shoulders rigid with all the things he couldn't say. They reached the Thornton ranch in late afternoon. Margaret pulled the wagon to a stop and stared, her breath catching in her throat. She'd expected something rough, a working ranch, functional but bare. Instead, she found herself looking at a real house, 2 stories, solid timber painted white, with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Smoke rose from 2 chimneys. A massive barn stood nearby, and beyond it she could see fenced pastures stretching toward the mountains. This was prosperity. This was everything Daniel had dreamed of building. "Mama," Sarah's voice was awed. "It's so big. It's beautiful." Even Will sounded impressed, his anger momentarily forgotten. The front door opened, and Samuel Thornton stepped onto the porch. Behind him came 4 men, ranch hands by the look of them, all watching the wagon with curious eyes. "Mrs. Callahan." Thornton came down the steps, moving with that same quiet authority she remembered from the pawn shop. "Glad you made it. Weather's been threatening all day." "Mr. Thornton." Margaret climbed down from the wagon, her legs stiff from the long ride. "I hope we're not imposing." "You're not imposing. You're expected." He looked past her to the children in the wagon bed, and something shifted in his expression. Something soft. Something almost vulnerable. "These are your young ones." "All 6 of them." Margaret turned and began helping the children down. "This is William, my oldest. He's 14. Then Sarah, she's 12. Thomas is 10. Grace is 7. James is 5. And this," she lifted Emma into her arms, "is Emma. She's 3. Thornton nodded to each child in turn, his gray eyes taking their measure. When he reached Will, the 2 of them locked gazes for a long moment. Margaret saw her son's chin lift, saw the challenge in his eyes, and held her breath. "William." Thornton extended his hand. "Your mother tells me you've been looking after the family since your father passed. That's a heavy load for a young man to carry." Will hesitated, then took the offered hand. "Someone had to do it." "That's true. But you don't have to do it alone anymore." Thornton's grip was firm, his voice sincere. "You're welcome here, son. All of you are." Margaret watched her son's face, saw the war between suspicion and desperate hope playing across his features. Will wanted to believe. Wanted so badly to set down the burden he'd been carrying for 8 months. But trust didn't come easy to a boy who'd learned so young that the world could take everything without warning. "We'll see," Will said finally, but some of the hardness had left his voice. Thornton turned to his men. "Boys, help get the wagon unloaded. Mrs. Callahan and her children will be staying in the east wing." He looked at Margaret. "It's got 3 bedrooms. Should be enough space for everyone." 3 bedrooms. Margaret couldn't hide her surprise. "Mr. Thornton, that's far too generous. We could make do with—" You're not making do with anything." His voice was firm but kind. "You're guests in my home. More than that, you're employees, and I take care of the people who work for me." One of the ranch hands stepped forward, a young man with red hair and a face full of freckles. "Ma'am, I'm Patrick O'Brien. Folks call me Patty. Let me take those bags for you." "And I'm Ezekiel Johnson." An older man, his skin dark as coffee, his eyes warm and wise. "Most people call me Zeke. Welcome to the Thornton Ranch, Mrs. Callahan." Two more men introduced themselves. Lucas Martinez, quiet and lean, who worked with the horses, and Benjamin Cooper, barely older than Will, who'd been working here for 2 years. Margaret shook each hand, noting how they looked at her children with curiosity rather than judgment. These were working men, rough around the edges, but there was no cruelty in their faces, no hidden agenda she could detect. "Let's get you inside," Thornton said. "It's getting colder, and your little ones look like they could use some warmth." The inside of the house was even more impressive than the outside. A large fireplace dominated the main room, flames crackling cheerfully. The furniture was simple but well made. And everywhere Margaret looked, she saw evidence of a household that functioned but lacked something essential. A woman's touch, she thought. That's what's missing. "Kitchen's through there." Thornton gestured toward a doorway. "You can look it over when you're ready. No rush tonight. Get settled first. Get warm." "I'd rather see it now if you don't mind." Margaret handed Emma to Sarah. "Take your sister to the fire, sweetheart. I need to know what I'm working with." She followed Thornton into the kitchen and stopped, her heart lifting for the first time in months. This was a real kitchen, large and well-equipped with a massive cast-iron stove, shelves lined with pots and pans, a work table in the center, and a pantry whose open door revealed more supplies than Margaret had seen in years. "Will this do?" Thornton asked. "This will more than do." Margaret moved to the pantry, taking inventory. Flour, sugar, salt, coffee, dried beans, bacon, preserved vegetables. Everything she needed to cook proper meals, the kind she hadn't been able to make since Daniel died. "Mr. Thornton, this is Sam." She turned. "What? Call me Sam. Mr. Thornton was my father." He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching her. "And before you say whatever you're about to say, this kitchen has been a disaster for a month. Our last cook quit when winter set in. Said the isolation was too much. Since then, we've been taking turns at the stove, and let me tell you, none of us should be allowed near one. That bad. Patty made biscuits last week that we're still using as doorstops." The corner of Sam's mouth twitched. "Tommy tried to fry an egg and somehow set water on fire." Despite everything, Margaret laughed. It came out rusty, unused, but real. "That's not actually possible. Tell that to the scorch marks on the ceiling." They stood there for a moment, the warmth of the kitchen between them, and Margaret felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Ease. Comfort. The sense that maybe, just maybe, things might actually be all right. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For everything. I don't know how I'll ever—" "You'll cook. You'll manage this household. You'll raise your children in a place where they're safe and warm and fed." Sam's voice was matter-of-fact, but his eyes were gentle. "That's how you'll repay me, Mrs. Callahan. By doing what you're already good at." "Margaret." His eyebrow rose. "If I'm calling you Sam, you should call me Margaret." She lifted her chin. "Fair's fair." Something flickered in those gray eyes. Surprise, maybe, or something else she couldn't name. "Fair's fair," he agreed. "Margaret." Her name and his voice sounded different, fuller somehow, more real. She turned back to the pantry, her cheeks suddenly warm. "I should start supper. Your men must be hungry." "They're always hungry. Take whatever time you need to get oriented." "I don't need time. I need to cook." Margaret pulled an apron from a hook by the door and tied it around her waist. "It's been too long since I've had a real kitchen to work with. If you don't mind, I'd like to start earning my wages." Sam nodded once and left her alone. Margaret stood in the center of the kitchen, surrounded by abundance, and let herself breathe. This was real. This was actually happening. She had a job, a roof over her children's heads, food to cook with, and an employer who seemed like an actual decent human being. It couldn't last. Nothing this good ever lasted. But for now, for this moment, she would take it. She rolled up her sleeves and got to work. Supper that night was simple bacon and beans, fresh biscuits, coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in. Nothing fancy. But when Margaret carried the first platter to the dining table, the reaction was worth more than gold. Holy! Paddy caught himself with a glance at the children. Holy Moses, ma'am, are those real biscuits? Like biscuits that won't break my teeth? They better not break your teeth or I'll be very disappointed in myself. Margaret set the platter down, hiding a smile. The ranch hands fell on the food like men who'd been starving, which in a culinary sense they probably had been. There were groans of appreciation, sounds of chewing, and a steady stream of compliments that Margaret tried not to let go to her head. Mrs. Callahan. Zeke looked up from his plate, his weathered face creased with something like reverence. I've been working ranches for 30 years. This is the best meal I've had since my mama passed. Thank you, Mr. Johnson. That's very kind. It ain't kind, ma'am. It's the truth. He took another biscuit. Boss, if you let this woman leave, I'm going with her. From his seat at the head of the table, Sam smiled a real smile, not the careful almost smile Margaret had seen before. Noted Zeke. I'll do my best to keep her happy. Margaret's children ate at a smaller table nearby, and she watched them from the corner of her eye. Tom was stuffing his face with the enthusiasm of a 10-year-old who hadn't had enough to eat in months. Jamie and Emma were sharing a biscuit, the younger one getting crumbs all over her face. Sarah was eating slowly, savoring each bite, her eyes closed with something like bliss. Grace was watching Sam. The 7-year-old had barely touched her food. Instead, she stared at the rancher with an intensity that made Margaret nervous. Grace had always been the observer of the family, the one who noticed things others missed. What was she seeing in Samuel Thornton, Grace's sweetheart? Margaret touched her daughter's shoulder. Eat your dinner. Mama. Grace's voice was quiet, pitched for only Margaret to hear. He's sad. What? The man, Mr. Sam. He smiles, but he's sad underneath. Grace picked up her fork but didn't eat. Like you are. Margaret didn't know what to say. She looked at Sam, at his easy posture and genuine smile, at the way he was laughing at something Patty had said. He looked fine. He looked happy. But Grace saw things other people didn't. Grace always had. Eat your dinner, Margaret said again, softer this time. We can talk later. Only Will wasn't eating. He sat at the corner of the small table, pushing food around his plate, his eyes fixed on Sam with undisguised suspicion. Every few minutes, his gaze would sweep the room, checking exits, assessing threats, calculating dangers that might or might not exist. My son has become a soldier, Margaret thought with a pang. At 14 years old, he's learned to expect attack from every direction. She wanted to go to him, to hold him, to tell him he could relax, that they were safe now. But Will wouldn't believe her. Will wouldn't believe anyone until he had proof, until time had passed, and nothing bad had happened. So she let him watch. Let him assess. Let him come to his own conclusions in his own time. After supper, as Margaret was washing dishes, Sam appeared in the kitchen doorway. You didn't eat with us. I was serving. Margaret kept her hands in the soapy water. It's not proper for hired help to sit at the main table. Margaret. Something in his voice made her turn. You're not just hired help. I told you you're managing this household. That means you eat at the main table with your children like part of the family. We're not family, Mr. Sam. We're employees. You're people I've invited into my home. That makes you more than employees. He crossed his arms, that stubborn set to his jaw that she was beginning to recognize. Tomorrow you sit at the table, all of you. That's not a request. Margaret wanted to argue. She wasn't comfortable with this blurring of lines, this erosion of the boundaries that were supposed to keep things professional. But there was something in Sam's eyes, that same old pain Grace had noticed, that made her hold her tongue. "Fine," she said. "We'll sit at the table." Good. He didn't leave. Just stood there watching her dry her hands, looking like he wanted to say something else, but couldn't find the words. "Is there something else?" Margaret asked. "Your boy, William." Sam paused. "He doesn't trust me. He doesn't trust anyone, not since his father died." "Can't blame him for that. Boy lost his pa, had to grow up overnight, watched his family struggle to survive." Sam's voice was thoughtful. "Takes time to learn to trust again after something like that. He'll come around, eventually. I know he will. I was the same way after my mother passed." Sam finally uncrossed his arms, his posture softening. "Just wanted you to know, I'm not going to push him. I'm not going to force anything. He can take all the time he needs to figure out I'm not the enemy." Margaret felt tears prick at her eyes and blinked them back furiously. "Thank you. That means more than you know." "Get some sleep, Margaret. Tomorrow's going to be busy." He left, and Margaret stood alone in the kitchen, surrounded by clean dishes and the lingering warmth of a fire, and wondered what she had gotten herself into. The first week passed in a blur of work and adjustment. Margaret rose before dawn each day, stoking the fire, starting coffee, preparing breakfast for men who worked hard and ate harder. The rhythm of it was familiar. She'd been cooking since she was old enough to reach a stove, but the scale was different. These weren't meals for a family of 8. These were meals for a bunkhouse full of hungry ranch hands. She adapted. She'd been adapting her whole life. What was one more challenge? The children found their own rhythms too. Sarah had taken over helping with the lighter household chores, dusting, sweeping, keeping the younger ones occupied. Tom had discovered the barn and spent every spare moment there watching the cowboys work with the horses. Grace sat by the fire and drew pictures on scraps of paper Patty had found for her. Jamie and Emma played endless games of their own invention, their laughter filling the empty spaces of the big house. And Will watched. Always watching. He helped where he could, carrying firewood, tending animals, doing whatever physical labor presented itself. But his eyes never stopped moving, never stopped assessing, never stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop. On the 5th day, something changed. Margaret was rolling out dough for pies when she heard shouting from outside. She wiped her hands and hurried to the window, her heart already racing with maternal fear. Tom was on the ground. A horse, one of the bigger ones, barely broken, was rearing above him, hooves flashing in the weak winter sun. And running toward them faster than Margaret had ever seen anyone move was Will. She didn't think. She ran. By the time she reached the corral, it was over. Will had grabbed his brother and rolled them both under the fence away from the panicked horse. Tom was crying, more scared than hurt, and Will was holding him, his own face white with shock and adrenaline. "Tom, Will!" Margaret fell to her knees beside them, her hands running over both boys, checking for injuries. "Are you hurt? What happened?" "I just wanted to see the horse." Tom's voice was hiccupy with tears. "I didn't mean to scare him. I didn't." "He's fine, Mama." Will's voice was steady despite his pale face. "Just scared. We're both fine." "That was quick thinking, son." Margaret looked up. Sam stood a few feet away, his expression unreadable. Behind him, Luke was calming the frightened horse, speaking to it in soft Spanish. "You saw your brother in danger, and you moved without hesitation," Sam continued. "That took courage and good instincts." Will's chin lifted. "He's my brother. What else was I supposed to do? A lot of people would have frozen. You didn't." Sam crouched down to their level, meeting Will's eyes directly. "I could use someone with instincts like that. Someone to help with the younger horses, the ones that need a gentle hand. You interested?" Margaret watched her son's face cycle through suspicion, surprise, and something that might have been hope. "You're offering me a job. I'm offering you a chance to learn, if you want it." The silence stretched. Margaret held her breath. Yeah. Will's voice was rough. Yeah, I want it. Good. We'll start tomorrow. Sam stood, nodded to Margaret, and walked away. Will stared after him, something shifting in his expression. Not trust, not yet, but maybe the beginning of respect. He's all right, Tom said quietly, his tears forgotten. Mr. Sam, he's all right. Maybe. Will helped his brother to his feet. We'll see. But later that night, when Margaret went to check on the children before bed, she found Will sitting by the window staring out at the dark landscape. You should be asleep, she said softly. I know. He didn't turn. Mama, why do you think he did that? Offered me the job, I mean. He didn't have to. Margaret sat beside him. I think he sees something in you, Will. Something good. He doesn't know me. Maybe he sees himself, when he was your age. She put her hand on his shoulder. He lost his mother when he was 15, you know. He told me. He knows what it's like to have to grow up too fast. Will was quiet for a long moment. I've been awful to him. Suspicious. Rude. You've been protecting your family. That's not awful. That's love. But what if... Will's voice cracked. What if he's actually good? What if this is actually real? What if we could actually be safe here? Margaret felt her heart break and mend at the same time. Then we accept it, sweetheart. We accept it, and we're grateful, and we don't question why good things finally happen to people who deserve them. Will turned to look at her, and in the dim light he looked so young, so scared, so desperate to believe. Do you think Papa would be okay with this? With us being here, with you working for another man? The question pierced Margaret to her core. I think your Papa would want us to survive. I think he'd want us to be happy. And I think, her voice wavered, I think he'd be proud of you, Will. So proud of the man you're becoming. Will's composure crumbled. He leaned into her, and for the first time since Daniel's death, he let himself cry. Margaret held her son, and cried with him there by the window, while snow began to fall outside. They cried for the man they'd lost, for the life they'd left behind, for all the pain they'd carried in silence for too long. And when the tears were done, something had healed between them. Not completely, not perfectly, but enough. I'll try, Will said, wiping his face. I'll try to trust him. For you. For the kids. That's all I ask, sweetheart. That's all any of us can do. She tucked him into bed like she hadn't done in years, and he let her too exhausted to maintain his grown-up pretenses. Then she walked through the quiet house, checking on each of her children in turn. Sarah slept peacefully, her worried face finally smooth in rest. Tom and Jamie shared a bed tangled together like puppies. Grace had fallen asleep with her drawings clutched in her hands. And Emma, her baby, lay in the small crib Sam had found somewhere, her thumb in her mouth, her red curls spread across the pillow. 6 children. 6 reasons to keep going. 6 hearts that were slowly, tentatively beginning to heal. Margaret went to her own room and lay down in the darkness, staring at the ceiling she couldn't see. Somewhere down the hall, Sam Thornton was doing the same thing. She knew it, somehow felt it in her bones. 2 lonely people in a big house, surrounded by others, but still fundamentally alone. Grace was right. He was sad underneath. And so was she. But maybe, just maybe, that was something they could fix. Together. Margaret closed her eyes and let sleep take her, and for the first time in 8 months, she didn't dream of Daniel's funeral. She dreamed of spring. The weeks settled into rhythm like a heartbeat. Margaret cooked. The children grew stronger. Will learned to work with the horses under Sam's patient guidance, and somewhere in the middle of all that ordinary living, something extraordinary began to grow. Margaret first noticed it on a Tuesday morning 3 weeks after their arrival. She was kneading bread dough when Sam came into the kitchen for his second cup of coffee, and she caught herself smiling before she even saw his face. Just the sound of his boots on the wooden floor was enough to lift something in her chest. That scared her more than the blizzard that had nearly killed them. "You're up early," she said, not looking at him. "Even for you." "Couldn't sleep." Sam poured his coffee and leaned against the counter close enough that she could smell the cold morning air on his clothes. "Zeke thinks there's another storm coming. A bad one." "How bad?" "Bad enough that we need to bring the cattle in closer. Bad enough that I want everyone to stay inside once it hits." He paused. "Bad enough that I'm worried." Margaret stopped kneading. Sam Thornton didn't admit to worry easily. "When?" "Tomorrow night. Maybe sooner." He set his cup down. "I need to ride out today, check on the far pastures, make sure we haven't missed any strays. I'll be gone most of the day." "Be careful." The words came out before she could stop them, more intimate than she'd intended. Sam's eyes met hers, and something passed between them, something neither of them was ready to name. "Always am," he said quietly. Then he was gone, and Margaret was left alone with her bread dough and her racing heart. She worked through the morning in a distracted haze, her mind returning again and again to that moment in the kitchen. The way he'd looked at her. The way she'd felt when he did. "This is foolish," she told herself. "You've been a widow for 8 months. You have 6 children. You work for this man. There are 100 reasons why you shouldn't feel anything." But feelings didn't care about reasons. Feelings did what they wanted, consequences be damned. "Mama." Grace appeared at her elbow, her serious eyes watching Margaret's face. "You're thinking about Mr. Sam." "I'm thinking about the storm, sweetheart." "No, you're not." Grace climbed onto a kitchen stool. "You get a different face when you think about him, softer." Margaret felt heat rise to her cheeks. "You notice too much, Grace Ann Callahan." "Mama." Grace's voice was quiet but certain. "It's okay to like him. Papa would understand." The words hit Margaret like a physical blow. She stopped what she was doing and looked at her daughter, really looked at her, at this 7-year-old who'd lost her father and watched her mother struggle, and somehow come through it with her heart intact. "How do you know that?" Margaret whispered. "How do you know Papa would understand?" "Because Papa loved you. And people who love you want you to be happy." Grace reached out and took Margaret's flower-covered hand. "You haven't been happy in a long time, Mama. But you're starting to be happy here. I can see it." Margaret pulled her daughter into a hug, not caring about the flower that transferred to Grace's dress. "When did you get so wise?" "I don't know. I just see things." "Yes, you do." Margaret kissed the top of her head. "Yes, you do." The storm arrived earlier than expected. Margaret was serving supper when the wind suddenly picked up, rattling the windows with a ferocity that made everyone stop and listen. Within minutes, the world outside had disappeared into a wall of white. That came on fast. Zeke stood and went to the window, his weathered face creased with concern. "Too fast. Boss ain't back yet." Margaret's heart seized. "What do you mean he's not back?" "He left this morning. He was checking the far pastures. Probably got caught when the storm hit." Zeke turned to face the room. "He knows this land better than anyone. He'll find shelter." "And if he doesn't?" Nobody answered. Nobody needed to. The next hours were agony. Margaret went through the motions of cleaning up, getting the children to bed, keeping busy. But her mind was outside in the storm, searching for Sam in the endless white darkness. What if he was hurt? What if his horse had thrown him? What if he was lying somewhere in the snow, slowly freezing to death while she sat here doing nothing? "You should sleep, ma'am." Patty had stayed up with her, keeping vigil by the fire. "Nothing we can do until the storm breaks." "I can't sleep. Not while he's out there. He's survived worse than this. Boss is tough." "Everyone's tough until they're not." Margaret stared at the flames. "Everyone's invincible until something kills them." Patty was quiet for a moment. "You care about him." It wasn't a question. Margaret didn't bother denying it. "He's a good man," she said instead. He deserves better than dying alone in a blizzard. That he does. Patty stood and stretched. I'm going to check on the bunkhouse, make sure the boys are settled. You holler if you need anything. After he left, Margaret sat alone in the quiet house, listening to the wind howl and praying to a God she wasn't sure she believed in anymore. Please, please let him be safe. Please don't take someone else from me. She must have dozed off because the next thing she knew she was jerking awake to the sound of the door crashing open. Sam stood in the doorway covered in snow, his face red with cold, his eyes wild. Behind him, the storm still raged, but somehow impossibly he'd made it home. Sam! Margaret was on her feet before she knew she was moving. Oh God, Sam, are you? I'm fine. His voice was rough, his words slurred with cold. Horse went down about 2 miles out, had to walk the rest. You walked in this. Margaret grabbed his arm and pulled him toward the fire. You could have died. You could have frozen to death. What were you thinking? I was thinking I had to get home. He let her push him into a chair too exhausted to resist. I was thinking about you and the children alone in the storm. I was thinking. He stopped, his eyes finding hers. I was thinking I couldn't leave you. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Margaret's hands shook as she pulled off his frozen gloves. You're an idiot. A complete and total idiot. You could have found shelter, waited it out. I couldn't wait. Sam caught her hands, stilling them. His fingers were ice cold, but his grip was strong. Margaret, I couldn't wait. Do you understand? She understood. God help her, she understood perfectly. Let me get you something warm, she said, pulling away, because she had to, because if she didn't, she would do something foolish. Coffee, soup, something. Margaret. You need to warm up. You need... Margaret. His voice was firmer now. Stop. She stopped. Stood there with her back to him, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. I spent 3 hours in that storm, Sam said quietly. 3 hours walking through snow, up to my waist, wind so cold it burned. And the whole time the only thing that kept me moving was thinking about getting back here, getting back to you. Sam. Let me finish. She heard him stand, heard his boots on the floor as he moved toward her. I've spent 7 years alone, Margaret. 7 years telling myself I didn't need anyone, didn't want anyone. My wife died and I swore I'd never let myself care like that again because the losing hurt too much. Margaret closed her eyes. She knew that pain, knew it intimately. But then you showed up. Sam's voice was closer now, right behind her. You and your 6 children, and your stubborn pride and your strength that puts the rest of us to shame. And I tried not to care. I tried so hard. But tonight, walking through that storm, I realized something. What? The word came out as a whisper. I realized I'd rather risk losing you than never have you at all. Margaret turned. Sam was right there, close enough to touch his gray eyes, burning with an intensity that took her breath away. I'm scared, she said. I'm terrified. I lost Daniel and it nearly destroyed me. I can't. I know. I'm scared too. His hand came up, touched her cheek. But I'm more scared of never telling you how I feel. Of watching you walk around this house every day and pretending I don't love you. You love me. I love you. The words were simple, certain, absolute. I love your children. I love the way you hum when you're cooking, and the way you stand up to bullies, and the way you'd walk through fire for the people you care about. I love everything about you, Margaret Callahan, and I am tired of pretending I don't. Margaret felt tears streaming down her face. Sam, You don't have to say anything. You don't have to decide anything. I just needed you to know. His thumb brushed away her tears. Whatever happens, whatever you choose, I needed you to know that you're loved, that you matter, that you're not alone anymore. I love you too. The words burst out of her, unstoppable, undeniable. I've been fighting it for weeks, telling myself it was too soon, too complicated, too everything. But I love you, Sam Thornton. I love your kindness and your patience and the way you look at my children, like they're precious. I love that you walked through a blizzard to get home to us. I love—" She didn't get to finish. Sam's mouth found hers, cold lips warming against hers, gentle and fierce, all at once. Margaret grabbed the front of his frozen coat and kissed him back with every ounce of feeling she'd been suppressing for weeks. The storm raged outside. The fire crackled behind them. And in the middle of it all, two broken people found something they'd both thought they'd lost forever. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Sam rested his forehead against hers. "Well," he said, his voice rough, "that's one way to warm up." Margaret laughed, actually laughed, and the sound was so foreign, so wonderful, that it made her cry all over again. "You're impossible," she said. "And you're beautiful." He kissed her forehead. "Now, about that coffee you mentioned." They sat by the fire for hours, talking and not talking, holding hands like teenagers, sharing pieces of themselves they'd kept hidden for years. Sam told her about Catherine, about the baby they'd lost, about the guilt he still carried. Margaret told him about Daniel, about the good years and the hard years, about the morning he'd left and the evening they'd brought him home. They talked about fear and loss and the courage it took to try again. "What will the children think?" Margaret asked as the fire burned low. "The children will think their mother deserves to be happy." Sam squeezed her hand. "And they'll be right. Will might have trouble with it. He's protective. Will's a good boy. He'll come around when he sees I'm not trying to replace his father. You couldn't replace Daniel." Margaret looked at their intertwined fingers. "But I don't need you to. I just need you to be you." "I can do that." Sam lifted her hand and kissed it. "I've had a lot of practice." The storm blew itself out by morning. Margaret woke in her own bed. She and Sam had parted with nothing more than kisses, both of them understanding that some things needed time, and lay there for a moment, letting the reality of the night wash over her. She loved him. He loved her. And somehow, against all odds, they were going to try to build something together. The fear was still there. It probably always would be. But underneath it was something stronger, hope perhaps, or maybe just the stubborn human refusal to stop reaching for happiness even when it seemed impossible. She got up and started her day. The children noticed something different at breakfast. Sarah's eyes kept darting between Margaret and Sam. Tom was oblivious too, focused on his eggs. Grace simply smiled her knowing smile. Will watched Sam with an expression Margaret couldn't quite read, but it was Jamie who broke the silence. "Mama?" Her 5-year-old looked up from his plate with innocent curiosity. "Why is Mr. Sam smiling so much?" The table went quiet. Sam's face flushed. Margaret felt her own cheeks burning. "I'm smiling because it's a beautiful morning," Sam said carefully. "And because I'm glad the storm is over." "Oh," Jamie considered this. "I thought maybe it was because you love Mama." The silence that followed was deafening. Margaret didn't know what to say, didn't know how to explain adult feelings to a child, how to navigate this conversation she hadn't been prepared to have yet. But before she could speak, Will spoke instead. "Do you—" Margaret's heart stopped. Will's voice was calm, controlled, but his eyes were intense, fixed on Sam, with an expression that demanded truth. "Do I what?" Sam asked. "Love her. My mother." Will's jaw was tight. "I'm not a kid. I see the way you look at her. I want to know if it's real." The room held its breath. Margaret wanted to intervene, wanted to smooth this over, but she knew in her bones that this was between Will and Sam, that how this moment went would determine everything that came after. Sam set down his coffee cup. He met Will's gaze directly man to man. "Yes," he said simply. "I love your mother." And you're not going to hurt her. You're not going to leave or die or disappear like my pa did. I can't promise I won't die, Will. Nobody can promise that. Sam's voice was steady, honest. But I can promise I'll never leave. Not willingly. Not ever. And I can promise I'll spend every day trying to deserve her. Will stared at him for a long moment. The tension in the room was suffocating. Then Will nodded. Just once. Just a small movement of his head. Okay, he said. Okay. And just like that, the wall came down. Not completely. Walls built of grief took time to dismantle, but enough. Enough to let light through. Enough to start building something new. Margaret felt tears pricking at her eyes. Sam reached under the table and squeezed her hand. Does this mean Mr. Sam is going to be our papa? Jamie asked, still innocent, still oblivious to the magnitude of what had just happened. It means, Margaret said carefully, that we're all going to take things one day at a time and see what happens. But if he does become our papa, can I call him Papa? Sam looked at Margaret. She nodded. If that ever happens, Sam said gently, I would be honored. Jamie grinned. Good, because I already practiced. The table erupted in surprised laughter. Even Will cracked a smile, and just like that, the tension dissolved into something warmer. Something that felt almost like family. After breakfast, while the children scattered to their various activities, Sam caught Margaret's arm. That boy of yours, he said quietly. He's going to be all right. I know. Margaret watched Will through the window, heading toward the barn with Ben. He just needed to know it was okay, needed permission to let go of some of that burden. He gave us his blessing. You know that, right, in his own way. I know. Margaret leaned into Sam's side. I know. They stood together, watching the children they would raise together, his by circumstance, hers by blood, theirs by choice, and felt the future stretching out before them like the endless Wyoming sky. There would be challenges ahead. There always were. But for now, in this moment, everything was exactly as it should be. The storm had passed, and something new was beginning. The weeks that followed the storm were the happiest Margaret had known since Daniel's death. She and Sam didn't rush things. There were children to consider, proprieties to maintain, and neither of them wanted to spoil what they were building by moving too fast. But the love between them grew steadily, quietly, like a fire banked low that burned all the warmer for its restraint. They stole moments when they could. A touch of hands in the kitchen, a shared smile across the dinner table. Late nights by the fire when the children were asleep, talking about everything and nothing, learning the shape of each other's hearts. Tell me about Catherine, Margaret said one night, curled in a chair while Sam sat on the floor beside her, his back against her legs. He was quiet for a long moment. She was kind, gentle. She laughed at my jokes even when they weren't funny. His voice was soft with memory. We only had 3 years together, not long enough. I'm sorry. Don't be. I've made my peace with it. Sam turned to look at her. Losing her taught me something important. What's that? That love is worth the risk, even knowing how it might end. He reached up and took her hand. I'd rather have 3 years of happiness than a lifetime of safety. Margaret squeezed his fingers. Daniel would have liked you. You think so? I know so. You're the same kind of man he was. Good. Honest. The kind who does right even when it costs you. Sam lifted her hand and kissed it. I hope I can live up to that. You already have. The children adapted to the new reality with varying degrees of ease. Sarah had become Margaret's right hand, helping with the younger ones, learning to manage a household. Tom spent every spare moment with the horses, his easy laughter ringing across the ranch. Grace continued her quiet observations, drawing pictures that she'd started giving to Sam, portraits of horses of the ranch of their growing family. Jamie had taken to calling Sam Papa within days of that breakfast conversation, the word slipping out naturally, as if it had always been there. Emma followed her brother's lead, her small voice saying, "Papa Sam," in a way that made the tough rancher's eyes suspiciously bright. And Will. Will was transforming. Under Sam's patient guidance, he was learning not just how to work with horses, but how to be a young man instead of a boy, forced to grow up too fast. Margaret watched them together, saw how Sam treated her son with respect and honesty, never trying to replace Daniel, but instead becoming something different. Something Will needed just as much. "He's good at this," Will said one evening, helping Margaret dry dishes. "Sam, I mean, with the horses. He's been doing it his whole life." "It's not just that." Will was quiet for a moment, his hands stilling on the plate he was drying. "He listens. When I talk about Pa, he listens. He doesn't try to make me feel better or tell me I should move on. He just listens." "Your father's memory matters," Margaret said softly. "Sam understands that." "I know." Will set down the plate. "Ma, I think I'm okay with this. With you and him. I wasn't sure at first, but now—" He trailed off, struggling to find the words. Now I think Pa would want this for us. For you." Will's voice cracked slightly. "You deserve to be happy, Ma. You've been so sad for so long." Margaret pulled her son into a hug, this boy who had tried so hard to be a man who had carried burdens no child should carry. "Thank you, sweetheart. That means more than you know." But happiness, Margaret had learned, was never without its shadows, and the shadow that fell across the Thornton ranch came in the form of Cornelius Wells. He arrived on a cold morning in late February, his fancy carriage looking absurdly out of place against the rugged ranch landscape. Margaret was in the kitchen when she heard the horses, and something in the pit of her stomach twisted with dread, even before she looked out the window. "Margaret." Sam appeared in the doorway, his expression tight. "You should come outside." She wiped her hands on her apron and followed him, her heart already racing. Wells stood in front of the main house, his expensive coat and polished boots, a stark contrast to the working clothes of the ranch hands who had gathered to watch. His smile when he saw Margaret made her skin crawl. "Mrs. Callahan?" He tipped his hat. "How lovely to see you again." "What are you doing here, Mr. Wells?" "I came to discuss a matter of business." His eyes slid to Sam, assessing, calculating. "With Mr. Thornton, actually, though I suspect it concerns you as well." Sam stepped forward, positioning himself between Margaret and the banker. "State your business, Wells." "Direct as always, Sam." Wells pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket. "I've recently acquired a rather interesting document. It seems the deed to the Callahan property had some irregularities." Margaret's blood ran cold. "What are you talking about? I paid those taxes. I have the receipt." "Oh, the taxes were paid, certainly. But there's the matter of the original land claim." Wells unfolded the paper with deliberate slowness. "It appears your late husband filed his homestead claim incorrectly. A minor clerical error, really. But enough to invalidate the entire deed." "That's impossible." Margaret's voice shook. "Daniel filed everything properly. We had a lawyer check." "Lawyers make mistakes, Mrs. Callahan. Or perhaps they can be convinced to overlook certain details." Wells's smile widened. "The point is, the land was never legally yours, which means it reverts to the territorial government, which means you found a way to steal it." Sam's voice was deadly quiet. "I prefer to think of it as a business opportunity." Wells tucked the paper back into his pocket. "Of course, this doesn't have to be unpleasant. I'm a reasonable man. I'm sure we can come to some arrangement." "What kind of arrangement?" Margaret asked, though she already knew. She could see it in his eyes, the hunger he'd shown that day in the bank. "The same arrangement I offered before." Wells stepped closer, his voice dropping to an intimate murmur. "Marry me, Margaret. Become my wife, and all of this goes away. The land stays in the family, so to speak. Your children have a secure future. Everyone wins." The silence that followed was absolute. Margaret felt sick, physically ill at the thought of this man's hands on her, his ring on her finger, his name attached to her children. "No." The word came from behind her, Will's voice strong and clear. Margaret turned. Her son stood on the porch, his face pale but determined. Behind him, Sarah had gathered the younger children, shielding them from whatever was happening. "Will," Margaret started. "No." Will came down the steps, his hands clenched into fists. "She's not marrying you. She's not going anywhere with you. You're a snake, Mr. Wells, and everyone in town knows it." Wells's smile faltered. "Young man, this is an adult conversation. I'm man enough to know a threat when I hear one." Will moved to stand beside Sam, his jaw set in the same stubborn line. "You want to take our land. You want to force my mother into something she doesn't want. You'll have to go through both of us." Something shifted in Sam's expression. He looked at Will, really looked at him, and Margaret saw respect there. Pride. The beginning of something that went deeper than friendship. "You heard the boy," Sam said quietly. "Whatever scheme you've cooked up, it ends here. I don't think you understand the situation." Wells's voice had gone cold, all pretense of pleasantness stripped away. "I have the law on my side. I have documentation. You have nothing." A new voice cut through the tension. Zeke stepped forward, his weathered face hard as stone. "I know you, Cornelius Wells. Know what you did to the Morrison family, the Hendersons, the Carters. You find technicalities, and you exploit them. You twist the law to serve your greed. This is none of your concern. It became my concern when you threatened this family." Zeke's voice carried the weight of 30 years of hard-won wisdom. "These people are under Sam Thornton's protection. That means they're under mine. And I don't take kindly to vultures circling the people I care about." One by one, the other ranch hands stepped forward. Paddy, his usual cheerfulness replaced by cold determination. Luke, silent and menacing. Ben young, but fierce. They formed a line between Wells and the house, a wall of loyalty that the banker hadn't anticipated. Wells looked at them, then at Sam, then at Margaret. For the first time, uncertainty flickered in his eyes. "This isn't over," he said. "I have legal standing. Then take it to court." Sam's voice was steel wrapped in velvet. "But understand this, Wells. If you come after Margaret or her children, if you try to take what's theirs through tricks and manipulation, I will make it my personal mission to expose every dirty deal you've ever made, every family you've ruined, every law you've bent. You don't have that kind of power. Try me." Sam stepped closer, and even though Wells was the taller man, he seemed to shrink under Sam's gaze. "I've spent 20 years building relationships in this territory. I know people. I have friends in the territorial government, friends in the newspapers, friends who've been waiting for someone to finally stand up to you." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Walk away, Wells, while you still can." The standoff stretched for an eternity. Margaret hardly dared to breathe. She could feel her children watching from the porch, could feel the tension thrumming through everyone present. Finally, Wells took a step back. "You're making a mistake," he said, but his voice had lost its confidence. "All of you, this isn't the end." "Yes, it is." Sam didn't move, didn't blink. "Get off my land." Wells turned and walked back to his carriage, his spine stiff with humiliation and rage. The ranch hands watched until the carriage disappeared down the road, until the dust settled and the silence returned. Then Margaret's legs gave out. Sam caught her before she hit the ground, his arms strong and sure around her. "I've got you. You're safe. It's over." "Is it?" Her voice was shaking. "He said it wasn't over. He said what men like him always say when they've lost." Sam helped her to a bench on the porch, keeping his arm around her. "He's got nothing, Margaret. His whole plan depended on scaring you into submission. Now that he knows you're not alone, he's got nothing. But the land claim is probably fine. Men like Wells manufacture problems to create leverage. We'll get a lawyer, a real one I trust, to look at the documents. I'd bet my ranch there's nothing actually wrong with your deed. And if there is... Sam was quiet for a moment. Then he took her hand and met her eyes. Then you'll stay here, you and your children, for as long as you want, forever if you'll have me. Margaret felt tears spilling down her cheeks. Sam. I was going to wait. His voice was rough with emotion. I was going to do this properly, give you more time, court you the way you deserve. But life's too short for waiting, and I almost lost you to that storm, and now this. He took a breath. Margaret Callahan, I love you. I love your children. I want to spend the rest of my life making you happy. Will you marry me? The question hung in the air. Around them, the ranch had gone silent. The hands were watching. The children were watching. Even the horses seemed to be holding their breath. Yes. The word came out as a whisper, then stronger. Yes, yes, I'll marry you. Sam's face transformed with joy. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her right there on the porch in front of everyone, and Margaret didn't care about propriety or appearances or anything except the feel of his lips on hers, and the promise of a future she'd thought she'd lost forever. When they broke apart, a cheer went up from the ranch hands. Patty was whistling. Zeke was grinning, and the children. Jamie came barreling off the porch and threw himself at Sam's legs. Does this mean you're really going to be our papa now? Sam laughed, scooping the boy up. I reckon it does, son. Can I tell everyone? Can I tell the horses? You can tell whoever you want. Jamie squirmed down and ran toward the barn, shouting the news at the top of his lungs. Emma toddled after him, not entirely sure what was happening, but determined not to be left out. Grace approached quietly and slipped her hand into Sam's. I knew, she said simply. I knew you'd stay. Did you now? I see things. She smiled her mysterious smile. I saw this a long time ago. Tom was next, his face split in a grin. Does this mean I can have my own horse now? Margaret laughed through her tears. We'll discuss it. Sarah hung back, watching her expression, a complicated mix of emotions. Margaret went to her, took her hands. Sweetheart, are you all right? I'm happy for you, Mama. Sarah's voice was sincere but subdued. I really am. She hesitated. I'm scared it won't last. I'm scared something will happen. I'm scared. I know. Margaret pulled her daughter close. I'm scared too, but that's what courage is, sweetheart, being scared and doing it anyway. Do you really love him? I really do. And he loves you. He loves us. More than anything. Sarah nodded slowly. Then okay. I'm okay. She looked at Sam over Margaret's shoulder. Welcome to the family, I guess. Sam smiled. Thank you, Sarah. I'll do my best to deserve that welcome. Only Will remained on the porch, watching everything with an expression Margaret couldn't read. Sam approached him slowly, man to man, giving her son the space to react, however he needed to react. Will. Sam's voice was quiet. I know this is a lot. I know you've got reason to be cautious. I just want you to know. You stood up for us. Will's voice was steady. When Wells came, when he threatened my mother, you stood up for us. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. No. Will shook his head. You could have stayed out of it. Could have let Ma handle it herself. But you didn't. You protected her. You protected all of us. That's what family does. Will was quiet for a long moment. Then he extended his hand. Take care of her, he said. Take care of all of them. Or I'll... You'll what? Sam asked, but there was warmth in his voice. I don't know yet, but it'll be bad. Sam laughed and took the offered hand. I believe you, son. And I give you my word I'll spend every day of my life taking care of this family. Your mother, your brothers and sisters, and you. I can take care of myself. I know you can. But you don't have to anymore. That's what I'm trying to tell you. Sam's grip tightened on Will's hand. You've been the man of the family for 8 months. You've done a hell of a job. But it's okay to let go now. It's okay to just be a kid for a while. I've got it from here. Something broke in Will's face. The wall he'd been maintaining, the stoic mask he'd worn since his father's death, it crumbled. And for the first time in 8 months, William Callahan let himself be held by someone stronger. Sam wrapped his arms around the boy, and Will buried his face in Sam's shoulder, his whole body shaking with the release of grief and fear and loneliness he'd been carrying alone for so long. Margaret watched through her tears, her heart so full it ached. This was family. This was what it looked like when broken pieces came together and made something whole. That night, after the children were in bed and the excitement had settled, Margaret and Sam sat on the porch watching the stars emerge in the vast Wyoming sky. Hell of a day, Sam said quietly. Language. Sorry, he grinned. Heck of a day. Better. Margaret leaned against his shoulder. Do you think Wells will really leave us alone? I think he'd be a fool to try anything else. But if he does, we'll handle it. Together. Together. Margaret tested the word found. She liked it. I haven't been part of a together in a long time. Neither have I. Sam took her hand. Reckon we both forgot what it felt like. Reckon we did. They sat in comfortable silence, the cold night air, sharp but not uncomfortable, with Sam's warmth beside her. When should we do it? Margaret asked. The wedding, I mean. Whenever you want. Tomorrow, next week, next month. I don't care as long as it happens. Spring, Margaret decided. When the snow melts and the world comes back to life. That feels right. Spring it is. Sam kissed the top of her head. Mrs. Thornton. Has a nice ring to it. It does. Margaret smiled. It really does. Above them, the stars wheeled slowly across the sky, indifferent to the small dramas playing out below. But Margaret didn't mind their indifference. She had something better than cosmic attention. She had love, she had family, she had a future, and for a woman who'd once stood ready to sell her wedding ring for bread, that was more than enough. That was everything. Spring came slowly to Wyoming, melting the snow in stubborn patches, revealing the brown earth underneath, like secrets finally told. Margaret watched the transformation from the kitchen window, her hands busy with bread dough, her mind busy with wedding plans. 3 months had passed since Sam's proposal. 3 months of healing, of growing, of becoming a family in ways none of them had expected. The lawyer Sam trusted had examined the Callahan deed and found exactly what Sam had predicted, nothing wrong. Wells's claims had been manufactured from whole cloth, a bluff designed to frighten a vulnerable widow into submission. The banker had gone quiet after that confrontation, though Margaret sometimes saw his carriage in town, sometimes felt his eyes following her when she went to Morrison's store. But he kept his distance. The word had spread about what happened at the Thornton Ranch, about how the widow Callahan had found protectors who wouldn't be bullied or bought. You're thinking too hard. Sam's voice came from the doorway, warm with amusement. I can hear it from here. I'm thinking about the wedding. Margaret didn't turn around. About everything that could go wrong. Nothing's going to go wrong. The preacher could get sick. The weather could turn. Wells could. Margaret. Sam crossed the kitchen and wrapped his arms around her from behind his chin, resting on her shoulder. The preacher is healthy as a horse. The weather looks fine. And Wells knows better than to show his face anywhere near our wedding. Our wedding. Margaret let the words settle in her chest. It still doesn't feel real. It's real. Sam turned her to face him, his gray eyes soft with love. In 3 days, you're going to be my wife. And I'm going to be the luckiest man in Wyoming. Just Wyoming. In the whole country. He kissed her forehead. In the whole world. Margaret smiled despite her worries. You're very confident. I have reason to be. I'm marrying the most remarkable woman I've ever known. Sam pulled back, studying her face. What's really bothering you? She should have known she couldn't hide anything from him. They'd spent 3 months learning each other's tells, each other's silences, each other's secret fears. I'm scared, she admitted. Not of marrying you, of being happy. Every time I let myself believe things are going to be all right, something terrible happens. Like Daniel. Like Daniel. Margaret's voice caught. I loved him so much. I thought we'd grow old together. And then one morning he kissed me goodbye and went to work, and I never saw him alive again. Sam didn't offer platitudes. Didn't tell her everything would be fine. He just held her, letting her feel the solid reality of his presence, the steady beat of his heart. I can't promise you forever, he said finally. Nobody can promise that. But I can promise you today, and tomorrow. And every day I'm given, I'll spend loving you and your children with everything I have. That's not a guarantee. No. But it's the truth. Sam lifted her chin. The question is it enough? Is what we have right now enough to build a life on? Margaret looked into his eyes, those gray eyes that had seen so much loss, so much pain, and still held so much love, and felt her fear begin to loosen its grip. Yes, she said. Yes, it's enough. Then stop borrowing trouble from tomorrow. Sam smiled. We've got a wedding to finish planning. The 3 days before the wedding passed in a blur of preparation and barely contained excitement. Sarah had taken charge of decorating the church, enlisting Grace and Emma in her campaign to make everything perfect. Tom and Jamie had been assigned to help the ranch hands set up tables for the reception. Will had taken on the responsibility of keeping everything organized, his natural leadership finally channeled into something other than survival. And Margaret tried not to think too much, tried to stay present in each moment instead of worrying about what might come next. The night before the wedding, she sat alone in her room holding Daniel's wedding ring in her palm. She'd worn it on her right hand since his death, a reminder of what she'd lost. Tomorrow, she would wear Sam's ring on her left hand, a promise of what she'd found. Mama. Sarah appeared in the doorway, already in her nightgown. Can I come in? Of course, sweetheart. Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, her eyes on the ring in Margaret's hand. Are you thinking about Papa? Yes. Do you think he'd be okay with this? With you marrying someone else? Margaret considered the question carefully. It deserved honesty, not comfortable platitudes. I think your papa loved me enough to want me to be happy, she said finally. Even if that happiness came from someone else. I think he'd be glad I found Sam. Glad we found a family again. But you still miss him. Every day. Margaret closed her fingers around the ring. But missing him doesn't mean I can't love Sam. The heart has room for more than one love, Sarah. It doesn't run out. That's good. Sarah leaned against her mother's shoulder. Because I think I love Sam too. Not like a papa, I'll always have papa for that. But like family. Is that okay? That's more than okay, sweetheart. Margaret kissed the top of her daughter's head. That's exactly what I hoped for. They sat together in the quiet room, mother and daughter, while the night deepened around them, and tomorrow waited just beyond the horizon. The wedding day dawned clear and cold, the kind of spring morning that held the promise of warmth, without yet delivering it. Margaret dressed in a simple blue dress, nothing fancy, nothing extravagant, but new and clean and hers. You look beautiful, Mama. Grace stood in the doorway, her serious eyes bright with wonder. Like a princess. Princesses wear fancier dresses than this. Not the real ones. Grace came in and took Margaret's hand. The real ones look just like you. Margaret knelt down to her daughter's level. Thank you, baby. That's the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me. I mean it." Grace paused, then added, "Papa Sam is going to cry when he sees you." "I already know." "How do you know?" "I just do." Grace smiled her mysterious smile. "I see things." The church in Red Creek was small, barely big enough to hold the ranch hands and the few townspeople who'd come to witness the wedding. But to Margaret, walking through those doors with Will on one side and Sarah on the other, it felt like a cathedral. Sam stood at the altar, wearing a suit Margaret had never seen before, his dark hair combed back, his gray eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Beside him, Zeke served as best man, his weathered face split in a proud grin. And Grace had been right. As Margaret walked down the aisle, she saw tears begin to slide down Sam's cheeks. He didn't wipe them away, didn't seem embarrassed by them at all. "You're beautiful," he whispered when she reached him. "I knew you would be, but this—" "Hush." Margaret's own voice was thick with emotion. "You'll make me cry, and then my face will be a mess." "I don't care about your face. I care about you." The preacher cleared his throat. "If we could begin." The ceremony was simple. Traditional vows exchanged with trembling voices and steady hearts. When the preacher asked if anyone objected, Margaret held her breath, half expecting Wells to burst through the doors with some new scheme. But the church stayed quiet, and the moment passed, and then Sam was sliding a ring onto her finger, a simple gold band warm from his pocket, and the preacher was pronouncing them husband and wife. "You may kiss the bride." Sam cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, gentle and thorough and full of promise. The church erupted in cheers, Patty's whistle rising above the rest, but Margaret barely heard them. All she knew was Sam's lips on hers, and the weight of the ring on her finger, and the overwhelming sense that everything was exactly as it should be. "Mrs. Thornton," Sam murmured against her mouth. "Mr. Thornton," she murmured back. "Let's go home." The reception lasted well into the evening. Tables had been set up outside the ranch house, laden with food Margaret had spent days preparing. The ranch hands had contributed their own offerings. Patty had somehow produced a fiddle and was playing reels that had everyone dancing, even Zeke, who claimed his dancing days were behind him. Margaret watched her children move through the celebration, each of them transformed in their own way. Will was laughing at something Ben had said, his face open and young in a way she hadn't seen in months. Sarah was dancing with Tom, both of them giggling as they tried to remember the steps. Grace sat on a blanket with Emma, watching everything with those knowing eyes. And Jamie was on Sam's shoulders, waving at everyone who passed like a king surveying his kingdom. "Happy!" Sam appeared beside her, Jamie still perched above him. "Unbelievably." "Good." He shifted Jamie to one arm and pulled Margaret close with the other. "Because you're stuck with us now. All of us." "That's the idea." "Papa Sam." Jamie tugged at Sam's collar. "Can we have cake now?" "We can have whatever you want, son. It's a party." "I want cake, and pie, and more cake." Sam laughed. "We'll see what we can do." He went off to negotiate with Jamie, and Margaret was left alone for a moment, watching her new husband carry her youngest son toward the dessert table. Her husband. Her son. The words felt strange and wonderful and absolutely right. "Mrs. Thornton." She turned. Martha Henderson, the widow who ran the general store, stood nearby, her weathered face creased with a smile. "Mrs. Henderson, I'm so glad you could come." "Wouldn't have missed it." Martha took both of Margaret's hands in hers. "I remember when you came into my store that first time looking for work. You were so thin, so scared. And now look at you." "I got lucky." "Luck had nothing to do with it." Martha squeezed her hands. "You survived, Margaret. You fought and you struggled and you never gave up. That's not luck. That's strength." Margaret felt tears prick at her eyes. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Just be happy. You've earned it." The celebration continued until the stars came out, until the children started drooping, and the ranch hands started yawning. One by one, people said their goodbyes until finally, it was just the family, Margaret, Sam, and 6 children who were officially, legally, undeniably theirs. "Bedtime," Margaret announced, and was met with a chorus of groans. "But Mama—" Tom started. "No arguments. It's late, and you've had enough excitement for one day." "Your mother's right." Sam scooped up Emma, who had fallen asleep on his shoulder. "Everyone inside. We've got all the time in the world for more celebrating." The children trudged toward the house exhausted but happy. Margaret watched them go, her heart so full it ached. "Thank you," she said quietly. Sam turned to her Emma still sleeping in his arms. "For what?" "For everything. For the job. For the home. For loving my children like they were your own." "They are my own." Sam's voice was firm. "From this day forward, they're mine. Every single one of them. Even Will. Even when he's stubborn and difficult, and especially then." Sam smiled. "He reminds me of myself at that age. All that fire, all that determination to protect the people he loves. He's going to be a good man, Margaret. He already is." They walked into the house together, checking on each child as they made their way to the master bedroom. Tom and Jamie shared one room, already bickering sleepily about blanket distribution. Sarah and Grace shared another, their beds pushed close together so they could whisper secrets in the dark. Will had his own small room now, a privilege Sam had insisted on as a recognition of his maturity. And Emma's crib sat in the corner of the master bedroom, close enough that Margaret could hear her if she woke. "Full house," Sam said, settling Emma into her crib. "Is it too full? Be honest." "It's exactly right." Sam straightened and pulled Margaret into his arms. "I spent 7 years in this house alone. 7 years listening to silence and emptiness. Now it's full of noise and chaos and life. That's not too much. That's everything I ever wanted." Margaret rested her head against his chest. "I love you, Sam Thornton." "I love you too, Margaret Thornton." He tilted her chin up and kissed her softly. "Now and forever. Whatever comes." The months that followed the wedding were the happiest of Margaret's life. Spring melted into summer, and with the warm weather came new challenges and new joys. The ranch prospered, the children thrived, and Margaret discovered that marriage to Sam was even better than she'd imagined. They disagreed sometimes about the children, about the ranch, about 100 small things that married couples disagree about. But they never went to bed angry, never let their arguments fester into resentments. They'd both lost too much to waste time on pride. Will had transformed under Sam's guidance. The angry guarded boy who'd arrived at the ranch was becoming a capable young man, skilled with horses, respected by the other hands. He still called Daniel Papa and Sam Pa, a distinction he'd worked out himself, but the difference no longer seemed to matter. He loved them both in different ways, and that was enough. Sarah had finally stopped trying to be a second mother to her siblings. She was learning to be a girl again, to play and laugh and dream about her future. She'd started writing letters to a cousin back east, planning a visit someday when she was old enough to travel. Tom had gotten his horse a gentle mare named Copper, and spent every free moment riding across the ranch, his red hair flying behind him. He was going to be a horseman, everyone agreed. It was in his blood. Grace continued to see things others missed. She'd started keeping a journal, filling it with observations and sketches, and the kind of wisdom that seemed impossible in a 7-year-old. Margaret had learned to pay attention when Grace made predictions. She was rarely wrong. Jamie had become Sam's shadow, following him everywhere, asking endless questions, absorbing everything like a sponge. He'd officially dropped Papa Sam and started using just Papa, a change that had made Sam cry for the second time Margaret had ever witnessed. And little Emma, had started calling Margaret Mama and Sam Papa without any memory of a time when they weren't her parents. She was the lucky one, perhaps. Too young to remember the hard times, young enough to accept this new life as simply the way things were. In late autumn, Margaret discovered she was pregnant. She told Sam on a cool October evening, both of them wrapped in blankets on the porch, watching the sunset over the mountains. "Are you sure?" His voice was barely a whisper. "I'm sure." A baby. Sam's hand found her stomach, his touch reverent. "Our baby. Are you happy?" Happy doesn't begin to cover it. His voice cracked. "Margaret, I never thought. After Catherine, after everything, I never thought I'd have this again." "Neither did I." Margaret covered his hand with hers. "But here we are." "Here we are." Sam kissed her long and deep. "I love you. I love our children. I love this life we're building together. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." He pulled her closer. "The hard parts are what make the good parts matter." The baby came in late spring, a year almost to the day after Margaret had walked 7 miles through a blizzard to sell her wedding ring. A boy, strong and healthy, with Sam's gray eyes and Margaret's auburn hair. They named him Daniel Samuel Thornton, a bridge between past and present, a testament to both the men who'd shaped Margaret's life. "Is it strange?" Sam asked on the night of the birth, holding his son while Margaret rested. "Naming him after your first husband. It feels right." Margaret watched them, her husband holding their son, and felt peace settle into her bones. "Daniel gave me 6 beautiful children. He deserves to be remembered." "He does." Sam looked down at the baby's face. "I hope I can be half the father he was." "You already are." The door creaked open, and 6 faces appeared in the gap, Will and Sarah and Tom and Grace and Jamie and Emma, all of them craning to see their new brother. "Can we come in?" Sarah asked. "Come in," Margaret said. "Come meet Daniel." They crowded around the bed, peering at the baby with varying degrees of fascination and confusion. Jamie wanted to know why he was so small. Tom wanted to know when he could teach him to ride. Grace simply watched with her knowing eyes, a small smile on her face. "He's ours," Will asked quietly. "Really ours?" "He's ours," Sam confirmed. "Just like all of you are ours. This family keeps growing, and that's exactly how it should be." Emma pushed forward, determined not to be left out. "Baby," she announced, pointing at Daniel's face. "That's right, sweetheart. Your baby brother. Mine, yours, and everyone's." Emma considered this, then nodded solemnly. "Good baby." The room erupted in laughter, and in that moment, surrounded by children and love and the chaotic joy of a family that had been built from broken pieces, Margaret felt something she'd almost forgotten how to feel. Complete. Later that night, after the children were in bed and the house had settled into quiet, Margaret sat in the rocking chair Sam had built for her nursing Daniel, while the fire crackled low. Sam sat across from her, just watching his face soft with contentment. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "I'm thinking about the day I met you." His voice was quiet. "Standing in that pawn shop, ready to sell your ring, ready to give up everything just to keep your children alive one more day." "I remember." "You were the bravest person I'd ever seen, still are." "I wasn't brave. I was desperate." "Same thing sometimes." Sam leaned forward. "I've thought about it a lot. What would have happened if I hadn't walked through that door? If I'd been 5 minutes later or 5 minutes earlier, or if I'd decided to go to a different town that day?" "Don't." Margaret shook her head. "Don't think about that." "I have to, because every time I do, I realize how close I came to missing all of this." He gestured around him at the house, at the baby, at the life they'd built. "Every time I hold one of those children, every time I look at you, I remember that it almost didn't happen. And I'm grateful, Margaret. More grateful than I can say." "I'm grateful too." Margaret looked down at Daniel, at his tiny fingers curled around hers. "For you. For this. For everything. No regrets. Not one." Sam crossed to her, kneeling beside the rocking chair, his hand coming up to cup her face. "I love you, Margaret Thornton. I loved you from the moment I saw you refusing to break, and I'll love you until my last breath. You gave me a family when I'd given up on ever having one. You gave me a future when I'd stopped believing in futures. You gave me everything. You gave me the same. Margaret leaned into his touch. You saved us, Sam. We saved each other. Margaret smiled. We did, didn't we? We did. Daniel made a small sound, and both of them looked down at him, this tiny miracle, this unexpected gift, this living proof that hope could survive the darkest winters. What do you think he'll be? Sam asked softly. When he grows up, whatever he wants. Margaret stroked her son's cheek. That's the gift we gave all of them, the freedom to become whoever they're meant to be. That's a good gift. The best one. Outside, the night was quiet. The ranch slept. The children dreamed. And Margaret Thornton, who had once stood ready to sell her wedding ring for bread, who had walked through blizzards and faced down bankers, and built a life from nothing. But determination rocked her son and watched her husband and felt the full weight of her blessings settle around her like a warm quilt. She thought about the ring still in her jewelry box. Daniel's ring, the one she'd nearly sold in Hartley's pawn shop. She'd kept it, would always keep it a reminder of where she'd been and how far she'd come. She thought about Sam's ring on her finger. Simple gold warm with wear, a promise kept every single day. She thought about her children, all 7 of them, now sleeping peacefully in a house that had become a home. And she thought about tomorrow, and all the tomorrows after that, stretching out like the Wyoming plains, vast and sometimes harsh, but full of possibility. Thank you, she whispered into the quiet. For what? Sam asked. For seeing me. That day in the pawn shop. For seeing past the desperation and the fear and finding something worth saving. I didn't save you, Margaret. I just gave you a chance. You did the rest. We did it together. Together. Sam smiled. I like the sound of that. So do I. She leaned down and kissed him soft and sweet, while their son slept between them, and the fire burned low, and the future waited just beyond the door. The widow who had walked into that pawn shop, ready to trade her memories for survival, had become something else entirely, a wife, a mother, a woman who had learned that hope could grow even in the coldest ground. She had sold nothing in the end. She had gained everything. And as the night deepened and the stars wheeled overhead and her family slept safely around her, Margaret Thornton finally understood the truth she'd been searching for all along. Love was not a thing you earned or deserved or bargained for. Love was a gift you accepted with open hands and a grateful heart. And she had accepted it. Completely, unreservedly, forever. The end was not really an ending at all. It was a beginning. The first chapter of a story that would continue long after this moment faded into memory. A story of a woman who refused to break. A man who refused to look away. And a family that was built not from blood alone, but from choice, from courage, from the stubborn human insistence on finding light even in the darkest of winters. Margaret Ruth Callahan Thornton had been ready to sell her wedding ring for bread. A cowboy had stopped her and said, "Keep it, I'll feed you all." And he had kept that promise every single day since. That was the truth of it, simple and profound. That was the whole story. That was enough.